Hello and welcome to Gravitee Edge. I'm Rory Blundell and the CEO at Gravitee. Before we get started into my session, I wanted to take the opportunity to welcome you today to this. This is the first session of our 3-day conference, Gravitee Edge. It's the first time we've done this and we are so excited to have you with us. We would ask that you really engage in the sessions, anything you want to ask, anything you want to speak about, anything at all, please do just engage with us at any time and we'd love to hear from you. Over the course of the next 3 days, we've got a lot of different sessions that are going on and a few different themes actually. So day one today, we're going to be focusing a little more on streaming, event streaming, how people use streams alongside APIs, alongside what we would call sync, alongside async and things of that nature. Tomorrow, we will be focusing more on listening to how people implement these different technologies, different customers of Gravitee, but also other companies in the world, people who are partners, people who are just using a lot of different types of technology, whether that be APIs, event streams, different types of data technologies. We'll be hearing from all the challenges, the opportunities, and everything in between really, that they experience on both a day-to-day and a strategic perspective. That's day 2. And day 3 is a little bit of a mashup of both of those things and a summary basically of everything that we have done and spoken about over the course of the past 2 days. The sessions are recorded and will be available for you 30 days after the event as well. So if you don't have the opportunity to watch it live with us, then you of course have the opportunity to watch it for 30 days afterwards as well. But we really, really are so pleased and so excited to have you with us over the course of these 3 days. I can't tell you from my perspective as the CEO here how excited and how proud I am actually of the company and where we are at this particular stage and what we have available to us now over the course of the next 3 days and how much interesting content there's going to be. So thank you for participating. I really hope you get a lot from it. And without saying anything else, one thing we would say is when we talk about engagement, anything on social media, anything that you want to post on LinkedIn, on X, Twitter, whatever we want to call it, Instagram, etc., then please do feel free to do so and we would love to hear from you. Okay, thank you. Without further ado though, I wanted to first of all talk in my session actually about API management and how it has evolved. It's a very complex subject, or has been over a long period of time, and that's the thing that we want to try to, or I want to try to distill here for you, is understand how we see the world, how we see things have evolved over the course of the last, let's say, 20 to 30 years approximately, and how we see the world will evolve moving forwards from a data perspective and where APIs fit into that. And that's what I want to cover today. So, what I want to really talk to you about is where everything started. It's not clearly where the world started or anything of that nature, or anything as quite as grandiose as that. But what I really want to talk to you about is where we see the concept of API management and that world really commence. So let's cast our minds back maybe, let's say to the year 2000 or maybe even before that. What people were doing at that particular point in time was they were making requests and were getting responses. What we would typically describe as synchronous communications. So those synchronous communications, people's use cases, business cases, I'm not saying that this is in the entirety of everyone's use cases, but by and large, people were sending requests and getting responses. Traditional request-response, synchronous types of architecture. And this sort of grew up, what I would say, as we said, in the early 2000s, give or take. And the first generation is really characterized by the ability to create standardization, security, governance, control, discoverability on top of all of the complex and monolithic data services that people had in the early 2000s and before. So if we look back at that particular point in time, there was still a lot of SOAP services around, WSDLs, all those sorts of things. Now, that's a fairly complex environment. And what the first generation of ESB and ETL, as we would call them, so enterprise service bus and extract, transform and load sort of platforms did at that particular point in time was they created the ability to have pipe work effectively. They were the plumbers of the world. And where API management really came in was to say, hang on a sec, we've got either internal, external, partners, whoever it may be, consumers of our data that we want to be able to expose this data to. And they said, okay, how do we take all of this plumbing that we've had, that we've got, and how do we ultimately expose it to these people in a consistent way, in a way that enables us to have consistent governance, control, security, discoverability, traffic shaping, all the different things that you come to expect in the API world. That is fundamentally what the first generation of API management did. It created that, but it was very much in that world of request response, as I just spoke about. Now, as people, so what I always see as we start, and we'll start to build up this graph here in one moment, but I always think of this first generation as being pretty aligned with a monolithic architecture, an architecture whereby it was largely very cumbersome, maybe difficult to update, upgrade, all those sorts of things. But as people, at the same time as this first wave or first generation, the overall themes, I would say, that we were seeing from an architectural perspective was you had the oncoming crescendo wave of the cloud, that people were starting to ask questions about, well, do I necessarily want to host all of this stuff? Do I need to host all of this stuff that I would have had on bare metal machines in servers that I had to look after and all this sort of stuff? And that was, so at the same time as having this request response capability, there was this architectural underlying theme that was happening over this period of time. And what people were starting to say was, okay, it sounds great that you've got this concept of the cloud, brilliant. How do I actually practically get there? How do I move from having this heavy duty on-premise architecture, which is monolithic and all that sort of stuff, how do I actually move there? And what we started to see, I would say the peak of this first generation was probably around 2016, give or take. These are not exact, this is my view, I should point out, and people may well, I'd love to hear from you if you have differences of opinion. But where we started to see is that desire to want to move to the cloud and ultimately create what we would now think of as a hybrid architecture. So you have aspects that are private and aspects that are maybe in public cloud and all these different things. That created ultimately a move to what we saw in the sort of mid-2010s, I would say, probably a bit earlier than that, of what we now think of as a microservice architecture. So ultimately, from an architectural perspective, you have moved from having a monolith to more of a microservices style architecture. Now, what's interesting about that is that if we come back to what I was saying before about request response, that has not changed in this period of time. Over this course of time, nothing has fundamentally changed in terms of the velocity typically that people are consuming data at and the way that they are typically consuming data. But people are wanting to benefit from the overall architectural benefits in this mid-2010 sort of period of being able to start to leverage the cloud. And as I say, it's not a perfect science. A lot of people would have adopted this sort of technology earlier, and some people may not even have adopted it fully yet. But this is a broad brush understanding of how I see and how we see the world has evolved at that point. Now, that all sounds very good, and it's interesting. But what we started to see as we got more towards the 2020s, I would say, is that people started to want to have more data, more accurate and more real time. And so naturally, what happened from an architectural perspective was you moved from it being a monolith to microservices and ultimately to an event-driven architecture. And what was very interesting in this point, and you saw a lot of platforms, whether that be Solus, and you'll hear from Dennis King, the CEO of Solus, and Bruno, who's one of one of their leaders as well on the technology side, talk later on. I think Dennis is talking today, and Bruno and Nico from Gravitee will be doing a demonstration actually of both of those platforms later on. What's interesting is that companies like Solus, like Confluent, like Kafka, like HiveMQ, like all these different sort of technologies, you had this confluence of different things that started to happen, whether it was IoT. People started to see with technological advancements that they could actually have these devices in their homes, and it started to subtly change, in my opinion, the expectations that people had of data. As I said, they wanted more of it. They wanted it to be more real time. They wanted to have more accuracy with that real time stuff, to be able to report on things to management or whatever it may be. And so this event-driven architecture was, I wouldn't say it was born at this particular point in time, because the concept has been around for a long time, but I think we certainly started to see it flourish around the 2020s, let's say. And probably before that, realistically, as well. This is, as I say, a simplified version of this. But what's really interesting about that is think about the challenge that people face going through this process. So you've started having this big monolith and saying, hey, we want to put this nice layer in front of all of our plumbing. And you've then said, hey, we now want to start to move towards the cloud and use things that maybe aren't controlled so much by us. And so you've got this hybrid architecture that's coming in that's driven microservices. But again, underlying all of that is this request response stuff. But now you've moved to a fairly different paradigm. The concepts, fundamentally, people are wanting to take data from here and move it to here, for example. But the actual paradigm and the fact that it's being driven by an event and things like that makes things a little more complex, or potentially a lot more complex. And what we really think is particularly interesting and where we see this market going is what we would call event-native API management. And this really fundamentally, from our perspective at Gravitee, is where we really differentiate as well. There is no other platform in the world that has the same unique capability in the same ease of use with a focus on security and all those sorts of things, that has the ability to be able to apply the same governance, the same principles, the same protocol, the same, not protocols so much, but the same policies, so you can shape the traffic in the same way. All of that sort of stuff is not easy for people to be able to do at this time. Ask yourself one question that I always think about. If I'm using a streaming platform and I want to apply some of the same principles that have become very normalized, let's say, over the last 15 to 20 years in API management. I want to apply traffic shaping. I want to rate limit. I want to be able to control how, who, when, all these sorts of things. I want to be able to discover different services. I want to be able to make my partners be able to discover different services, and to have things like permissions set up to be able to have subscriptions to different types of services. Now think about that, all of those concepts that are fairly well-trodden paths, I would say, in the initial world of API management with the request response, regardless of whether it's 1.0 or 2.0. Now, think about how does that work in a 3.0 or event-native API management world. It is not easy. But Gravitee addresses that. That is exactly where we see the world moving and how we see it evolving. But we don't think it stops there. We are only at the start of the evolution, in my view, of this particular journey. Where we are now, so that first curve, I would say we are, as I just said, we are very much at the start of that curve, I would say. And we're only just starting to see the opportunities and the scale of things, all of the stuff that you saw in API Management 1.0, where people were creating products and all this sort of stuff on top of their APIs. Imagine extending that concept further to your events as well. And that's what this particular sort of set of images will hopefully try to build up for you. This first point is really where we are now, in my view, and I think there's 3 stages of growth within event-native API management itself. At the moment, what do you have the ability to do with event-native API management? Well, Let me talk about it from a Gravitee perspective. You can plug in any of your different architecture, all of your different components. So let's say you want to plug in a Kafka topic or a Kafka broker and to discover the topics. Let's say that you want to plug in a Solace broker. Let's say you want to plug in REST APIs, whatever it may be. You have that ability in Gravitee today, and you have the ability to provide consistent discoverability, consistent security, consistent traffic shaping, consistent governance, consistent control. All of these different things are available to you today within the Gravitee platform. But we don't think that is the end state. Event native API management, in my view, has much further to go, and it's going to be incredibly exciting to go on this journey, in my view, over the course of the next 1 to 2 years. And these things are coming thick and fast from our perspective. And I can't wait for you to hear from Linus, our SVP of product, and David, our CTO, over the course of, I think Linus speaks this afternoon and David tomorrow. There's some amazing stuff that I want to just tease you with a little bit at this point in time that they will actually announce to you and demonstrate to you over the course of the next 2 days. But how I really see this working is, now let's think for a minute. You've now got all this different stuff going through the Gravitee gateway potentially. But what if you want to have more of a federated kind of environment where it's not necessarily mediated? So what I've just referred to by being able to plug in your different topics and all this sort of stuff is what we would call mediation. So things are being mediated. Maybe you've got a protocol at the front. Maybe you want to expose a WebSocket connection or expose it as a REST API with a GET capability. But in the back end, you've got a native Kafka or Solace topic or queue. That's what mediation is. But what if you want the ability to federate, where you don't necessarily have to put things through all one single component, but you have the ability to do the subscription management, the monitoring, the discoverability for all of your consumers? This is where we see, and this is something that, as I said, Linus and David will talk very much about over the course of the next 2 days. But this is something that we see people, it's very different. We've seen this theme, I would say, and trend through through the first generation of API management and the second generation, where people often talk about, multi-gateway. I thought myself, Linus, David, a lot of our organization thought about this concept. And we concluded that in and of itself, multi-gateway is interesting, but not that interesting. Where we think that people will have the biggest challenge is where they've got multi-gateway sitting alongside multi-broker or multi-streaming technologies. That is a very complex environment. And that, with Gravitee, you will be able to solve. And Linus will show you this, as I said, in, I think, about 2 sessions' time, and it will be incredible. Believe me, I can't wait for you to see it and hear what you have to say about it and all of the different feedback we get. But then again, we're only 2/3 of the way through this particular evolution of event-native API management. What comes next after that? Well, my belief is that if we take a step back at this particular point in time, and you've said, okay, you've now got both these capabilities of federation and mediation. Brilliant. That sounds interesting. But I sense, and I believe where this market is going, is that when you're at that particular point, what you will be wanting to do is, because you'll have a fairly complex cobweb of different types of systems and applications and back-end protocols and things like that, you will want the ability to make this significantly easier and to enable people to be able to potentially self-serve and things like that. And this is where we feel generative AI and machine learning have a huge part to play in this world. And David will talk you much more through this tomorrow. But on top of that, we think that people will want to be able to use those generative AI capabilities and stitch these different types of capabilities together. So let's say that you've got a streaming piece of technology, like a Kafka topic. And let's say you want to augment the data that goes out through a WebSocket connection with, so let's imagine, just as an example for a moment, that you've got, I don't know, let's say a flight booking system, and you've got people on a plane, and you're on your Kafka topic, it's saying, hey, there's a different person that's going to be, you've just had a change of person or something in a particular seat. Now, let's say that for every single one of those, you need to send that event out to somebody via a webhook, or you want somebody to be able to actually consume that data via a REST GET, whatever it may be. Now, let's say that when you consume that data, you need to augment it with the flight information. So let's say the flight is going from, I don't know, let's say Denver International Airport, where our US head office is, or to London, where our UK head office is, or to Paris, close to where our French head office is. Now, let's say that you want to be able to do that. So all of these sorts of things start to mean that you have a very complex ecosystem that you need to be able to work with across multiple velocities to stitch stuff together, to create one facade, potentially, one product, regardless of the velocity of your underlying data service. And you want to be able to do this easily. And you want to be able to do it securely. That is where we see the future of event-native API management going. And you will see exactly how we believe in not just slideware or anything like that, a real demo of how we believe this is going to come together over the course of the next 2 days. And I cannot wait for you to see it. I'm so excited. When I saw it myself for the first time, I was wowed, and I really thought, hey, this is the future, and I can see how this is evolving. And that is how that is how we see this world, this data world, starting to shape up and starting to evolve over the course of the next 1 to 2 years. And really, that's it from my perspective. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to field anything. But it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I hope it's been interesting, and I cannot wait for you to experience and to listen to all of the different talks, topics, case studies, everything that we've got going over the course of the next 3 days. And I can't wait to hear from you and to speak to you personally. Thank you so much, and look forward to speaking to you soon. Take care.